The town of Lugubre had always been a quiet place, with its cobblestone streets and red-roofed houses, where everyone knew each other and the news spread like a rumor on a summer afternoon. However, in recent weeks, an eerie darkness had begun to loom over its inhabitants. The shadows, they said, moved with a life of their own, and those who stared at them disappeared without a trace. Roberto was never a superstitious man, but the disappearances were real, and worse, inexplicable. He decided that his wife Laura and their two daughters, Sophia and Clara, would be safer away from the village. After packing the essentials, the family moved to a cabin in the mountains, a refuge where they hoped to find peace and safety. The drive to the cabin was tense. The road wound through the tall trees, whose shadows seemed to lengthen longer than usual in the evening light. Roberto kept one hand firmly on the steering wheel, while with the other he caressed Laura's hand, trying to calm his own nerves. "Dad, why are we going so far?" Sophia asked from the back seat, breaking the silence. "It's just out of the precaution, honey. We'll be safer here," Roberto replied, trying to sound convincing. Clara, the youngest, looked at the landscape with large, curious eyes, not fully understanding the gravity of the situation. At 7 years old, shadows were nothing more than a game, something to scare her older sister when the lights went out. The first night on the mountain was quiet. The crackling of the fire in the fireplace, the whisper of the wind through the trees, and the distant hooting of an owl reminded them of the beauty of nature. Laura prepared a simple but comforting dinner, and soon the girls were asleep under the cover of their blankets. But as the night wore on, the tranquility turned to tension. Roberto woke up suddenly, not knowing exactly why. He got up slowly, trying not to wake Laura. Looking out the window, his eyes met a shadow that shouldn't be there. The dark figure moved slowly, approaching the hut. Roberto felt a chill run down his spine. Without making a sound, she went to her daughter's room. Sophie and Clara slept soundly, oblivious to the threat that loomed over them. He decided to remain calm and went back to his bed, hoping that the shadows were nothing more than a figment of his imagination. But they weren't. The next morning over breakfast, Clara mentioned something that made Roberto's heart stop. "Dad, I saw something in the woods last night. It was like a shadow, but it moved." Roberto stared at her. "Did you stare at her, Clara?" "No, I was frightened and closed my eyes." Roberto breathed a sigh of relief, but his relief was short-lived. I knew they couldn't stay there forever. They needed a plan. The shadows were getting closer, and he had to protect his family. Over the next few days, Roberto began to investigate more about the shadows. In the small village nearby, he found an old woman who had lived in the mountains all her life. She told him ancient stories, legends of shadows that hunted down the curious and reckless. The shadows, son, have always been here. They are part of this place, a kind of dark guardians. They don't like to be watched, and they take away those who stare at them, the old woman explained. "Where are they being taken?" Roberto asked, desperate for answers. The old lady looked at him sadly. "To a place between this world and the next, a place from which few return." Armed with this new information, Roberto decided to prepare his family. He taught them to never look directly into the shadows and to always be attentive. But the tension grew with each day they spent in the cabin. The shadows approached each night, surrounding the house, watching. One night, the full moon bathed the cabin in its pale light. Clara, tired of the constant surveillance, opened the door of the cabin to get some fresh air. she did not notice the shadow that awaited her at the bottom of the stairs. Roberto, who was in the kitchen, heard his daughter's scream and ran to the door, but it was too late. Clara had stared at the shadow, and it enveloped her in deep darkness before disappearing with her. Desperation washed over the family. Laura wept inconsolably while Sophia tried to understand what had happened. Roberto, heartbroken, decided he would do the impossible to get his daughter back. That night, as darkness shrouded the cabin and shadows loomed, Roberto swore he would find Clara. It didn't matter what it cost or how long it took. The shadows wouldn't take his daughter away without a fight. As the night wore on, Roberto noticed something else in the darkness. It wasn't just the shadows that lurked. There was something else, an older, deeper presence. These were the guardians of the earth, beings who, according to legend, were extensions of the earth itself, created to protect its darkest secrets. They were immense creatures made up of roots and rocks, their bodies fused with moss and the earth itself. His eyes shone with a spectral green light and moved with the slowness and force of a mountain. Roberto saw them for the first time that night. As he walked along the edge of the forest, looking for any sign of Clara, he felt the ground shake. From among the trees, a gigantic figure emerged, its body made up of the very earth it was walking on. Roberto froze in place, his eyes fixed on the creature. It was one of the guardians of the earth, a beast that seemed to have awakened with the increasing activity of the shadows. The guardian looked at him with his luminous eyes, and at that moment, Roberto understood that these creatures were not only protectors of the earth, but also allies of the shadows. They were there to make sure that the secrets of darkness remained hidden, to punish those who dared to challenge the natural balance. With his heart pounding, Roberto slowly backed away, not taking his eyes off the guardian. He knew that facing these creatures would be even more dangerous than facing the shadows. But now he had a new mission, not only to rescue his daughter from the shadows, but also to figure out how to take on the guardians of Earth. The first night in the cabin had been just the beginning. Now Roberto had to prepare for a battle against forces he had never imagined, forces that were determined to protect his secrets at any cost.